Welcome, Wargamers, back to the High Throne of Azir, Origins of the Stormcast Eternals. Today, we're going to explore the lore behind Gavriel Sureheart, one of the new characters of the Stormcast Eternals that just kind of like suddenly popped up in their current battle tome, and we're going to talk about that, because I think we've covered the rest of those heroes that just kind of came out of nowhere. He's the last one, and he is incredibly interesting. Now, there's not a whole lot of dedicated lore for him, but the story arcs that we get from him I find very compelling, and I wanted to share it. This legend amongst the Hammers of Sigmar began his mortal life as a slave. He was born to two other slaves held in a Khorne fortress known as the Rat Spike. Now, we don't have a ton of information on these first early years, right? We learn that the beating heart of Rat Spike as a fortification is its arena pit. It's a Khorne fortress after all. But this place has to be bigger than just the arena, because the whole thing is referred to as being a citadel. And this fighting in Rat Spike had a reputation where the blood flows in great measure. In fact, the arena pit was lined with these like wicked looking gargoyles, and when a match had reached kind of its zenith, blood would come pouring from the mouths of these immobile onlookers. And so I imagine watching like the most brutal Mike Tyson fight, and then there's just gargoyles all around the ring to just start pouring out blood. However, this was not some ornate, blood magic or a sign of Khorne's blessing. This blood was collected and poured into a series of canals that fed into these statues. This is a place of battle, but it's also a place of showmanship and entertainment. This is how you entertain Khorne's masses. Side note, I assume it's the blood of the losers and slaves, but it's never directly clarified, and so this whole thing that our little slave family is a part of is a rather large production. So where does Gavriel fit into this? Well, the mortal who would become Sureheart was raised in slavery, and his only name that he had as a human was Grub. Okay, and his daily tasks as a child were to go around the entire arena and to pour the blood into the canal systems, right? He was just a little blood bucket boy, and he would just walk around and pour it into the canals that fed into these gargoyles. Essentially, he was a slave stagehand, and this was a terrible childhood of beatings between fists and the lash, minimal food, constant fighting over scraps, and just kind of degrading conditions for a child. When Grub came of age, again, we're not really specified on what of age means, he was given a mask and a spear, and he was told, you're going into the arena. At this point, meaning, you've outlived your usefulness as a minor servant, and now we're just going to throw you in the slave pits, right? You were just going to let you die for entertainment, and your blood will be the one being poured into a bucket by some other slave kid, and this whole process just repeats itself. Again, this is really telling us how this fortress kind of operates. Take slaves, you breed them as needed, give them menial tasks as children, but at a point, they are there for entertainment, and so when you're old enough, you get thrown into the arena itself as a combatant. Again, it's Khorne, all of this is operating as intended, no real surprises here. However, what the keepers of the Rat Spike didn't intend for was Grub's success upon his debut. You see, his whole childhood, he kept his head down doing his day job, and I can imagine warriors and adults kind of brushing him off as, like I said before, the blood bucket boy. He's just kind of in the way, he's a servant, smack him when you want to, whatever. But in truth, he was learning. You see, Grub studied the motions of successful gladiators, their stances, their weapon choices, their weaknesses. Then at night, when, basically everyone else was passed out from exhaustion, he and a few other slave children would practice. They'd use sharpened mops in places of spears, and they basically just disciplined themselves in the way of the gladiator. So day one, when he steps into the pit as a fighter, he's brilliant. We don't have a lot of details here. They kind of just talk about the passage of time, so we know that his first week as a fighter saw the gargoyles overflowing with blood, telling me that he was able to take out enemies left and right. And this trajectory of success and bloodshed didn't end there. See, at one point, a full month of slaughter culminated in Grub putting his spear into the rat spike's king. Now, I don't know if this was in the arena or itself, or if Grub just straight up chucked the spear at this leader who he saw sitting somewhere. I'm personally inclined to believe that the king of Ratspike saw this slave besting some of his warriors and decided to take him out personally, only to meet the same end. That seems very cornate to me in terms of like a leader has to constantly assert his dominance, right? If this slave nobody is killing your best warriors, at some point you need to step in and squash that to assert that your fighters are the best and that you should be in control. No matter how it happened, when this king died, whatever semblance of order or structure that the rat spike had quickly degraded into chaos. Grub led an uprising of slaves and they tore out of the citadel to freedom. Now, sadly, they didn't make it very far at all, because essentially they got run down that same night, which I understand because they're totally lost, right? If you were born and raised as a slave inside this citadel, you don't know what the outside world is like. You don't know how to navigate it. You're hungry and you're weak because they kept you that way for so long, and all it would take is a couple of chaos knights on horseback to just run you down. So of course, pretty soon after their escape, that same night I said, all these slaves were captured, and Grub was set to be executed. He's tied down, the executioner stands above him, but before the axe can fall and sever his head, the young man known only as Grub was struck by a blinding flash of lightning and taken up to High Azir, reforged, renewed, and reborn, and given a new name, Gavriel Sureheart. Now, at this point, sadly, the lore on him pretty much ends. He really did well in the Gladiatorium pit, which is where Sigmar puts his Stormcast to perfect and train their skills, but that makes perfect sense. Few can match him in one-on-one combat. He acts as a Lord-Celestant within the God King's armies, which at first I was skeptical of, right? Because I was like, okay, so he is a slave guy, he's not used to leadership or large-scale military tactics. All those things would be very new to him. But the more I thought about it, I really thought to think, actually, he's the perfect Lord-Celestant, because he looked around at his environment, he learned from it, he trained himself, he was able to teach others how to fight, he inspired a rebellion and led his people from captivity. They were never going to survive, because they just didn't have, the means by which of escaping and true survival out in the land, but the characteristics that brought him to that point are still incredibly rare and valuable. That's a lot of charisma. It's a lot of motivation, of, a direction of leadership and that kind of stuff. And so I after I thought about it for a moment, I was like, okay, yeah, that makes total sense. You can teach military tactics at training school, but you can't necessarily teach that level of leadership and self-motivation. And the last little note they touch on for him is that he has near perfect recollection of his life as a mortal, which is important because not all Stormcasts have that. So he's not just fighting like a warrior, he's fighting like a man who has truly been given a second chance at vengeance. And now he has the power, the physical strength to try and make sure that no one has to suffer like he did. Now that's all we get for established lore, but let's back off and talk about why is he cool. I had no idea that Gavriel Sureheart had such a cool background until I went to tackle his little subject here. And first of all, I'm just going to say straight up, I'm naming my firstborn child Grub. I love it. Why not? It's the best name ever. Grub Griggs. I want a full book on his story, right? All the interesting stuff about him being a boy raised in an impossible situation. I want to see what it's like to be raised in a Khorne citadel. How does it operate? What is it like day to day? How was he treated as a child? What age was he deemed to be, a fighter or worthy to be a fighter? I just want to know these things and see him grow as a character and how he, I want to see what Sigmar saw in him in terms of his ability to lead and inspire and train and learn. All those things are incredibly interesting to me. I love the fact that he had a slave name and then was given a new identity, right? Identity is something we talk about all the time when it comes to Stormcast, because that's kind of their main weakness in terms of like the reforging process robs them of it. And identity is also why typically they died fighting the way they did and why Sigmar took them up in the first place. So what does it mean to be given a real name, right? Like, they called him Grub, but he wasn't really called anything else. He was just kind of an annoying little kid. So to be treated like a person for the first time, and you have to basically be on your deathbed because they were going to kill him by decapitating him. What is that like to be given not only a holy mission and infused with the power of a god that you didn't even know was listening, and then given a new identity? I just think that that is such a beautiful story arc that I would love to follow. It's like coming from this place of absolute powerlessness and then being infused with the power of a god, right? We talk about identity. His is incredibly unique, even amongst all the Stormcast heroes we've met so far. And I didn't realize I was going to end my exploration of Sureheart being like, I want more of this, right? His model appeared, and people joke about his model looking like Tommy Wiseau and that kind of stuff, and I'm here for it. I love it. I love it all. It's a good laugh. But the truth is that they wrote an extremely compelling character in about 3 paragraphs, and I want a book series about it. I want to know what the Khorne Fortress is like. What are the mortals who were trapped in subjugation throughout the Age of Chaos? What were their lives like? What is it like to be given, first of all, a second chance, but a new identity, to be powerless and then become incredibly powerful? I want more of those stories, because I think that's what makes Stormcast truly compelling. Not so much the actual like fight battle scenes. Those are all, they can get kind of vanilla, to be honest with you. But the internal struggle of identity and what we become and what we leave behind, and the scars that have to mix between those two, make Stormcast to me an extremely compelling army. So I was totally blown away by this. I was not prepared to love Gavriel as nearly as much as I did, but now I'm on board and I want more of it. So friends, tell me your thoughts. What do you think of Gavriel Sureheart, Lord-Celestant of the Hammers of Sigmar? Leave your thoughts down below. I'd love to hear about how you use him in-game, but also, obviously, narrative-wise, and I want to hear all those things, and I'll catch you in the comments. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you in my next Age of Sigmar video. Happy wargaming. Hey everybody, I hope you enjoyed that video. It was made possible by the folks over here to the left. These are my top supporters over here on YouTube and on Patreon that keep this channel going. If you'd like to learn more about how to become a supporter and get some cool things in the process, like exclusive pictures and interactions with me, and get your questions answered here on the channel, go ahead and click any of the links down below or the join button on the community page over on YouTube. Regardless of your choice, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me with this video, and I look forward to seeing you in my next one. Happy wargaming.